This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with Tony Karman, founder, president, and director of EXPO Chicago. One of the top international art fairs, EXPO Chicago has become a key date on the art fair calendar by welcoming collectors, curators, and museum directors from around the globe to Chicago's Navy Pier during the second week of April. In 2023, Frieze acquired the art fair along with the Armory Show, with no plans for rebranding either. In the conversation, Tony talks about what makes EXPO Chicago unique, the strengths of the Chicago arts community, and the logistical challenges of executing an event of its size and scope. And now, a conversation about hosting the art world in the Windy City with EXPO Chicago's Tony Karman. Tony Karman, thank you for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Tony, you're the founder, president, and director of EXPO Chicago, and EXPO Chicago will be coming up soon, April 11th through the 14th. And I guess, Tony, a good place to start in my mind is just kind of the world of art fairs. At this point in the world, there are nearly 400 art fairs worldwide. For those folks that have been to an art fair, they've gone to Art Basel or Miami Beach, one of the Frieze fairs, the Armory Show. How do you manage to differentiate EXPO Chicago from other art fairs out there?
Well, I like to say that Chicago, and surely EXPO Chicago, was built on a tradition of Chicago being the first city to host an international art fair for over 18 years, beginning in 1980. So those were different times. Those were different times when there were only 6 art fairs in the world. But that foundation, that tradition is not lost on many individuals. I think the biggest differentiator, to answer your question, is that art fairs are important convening moments for collectors and curators and arts professionals to descend on cities to also experience that rich culture that the city and the region is providing. And I think Chicago does that well. We, from the beginning, have benefited greatly from this collaborative nature of our institutions, our galleries, our artists opening up artist studios. So like the 400 fairs that you mentioned, one of the important moments are, people to convene, explore the city, explore the rich culture that's happening here. And for Chicago, again, I like to say that we look to the world, but we also want to make sure that we're supporting the greater Midwest region, which is incredibly important to the exhibitors that are participating in our fair. The international exhibitors want to reach those tertiary museums and collectors and institutions. And I think one of the hallmarks of EXPO Chicago is we've done our job to gather the greater Midwest, along with the coast, of course. But I think that's what makes us unique. And here we are sitting in the center of the U.S., which geographically is a lovely place to be.
Well, that art fair history goes back even further in the 1980, because a conversation I was having with Ann Tamkin of MoMA about the Matisse Red Studio show last year at MoMA. We were talking about how that piece was included in the Armory Show back in 1913. And, I had learned at that point that the Armory Show wasn't just at the Armory in New York. It also traveled to the Art Institute and to Boston. And so I say that in terms of just saying what a long, rich history Chicago has as being part of, a cog in the art world. In particular, what the Art Institute means to, the city of Chicago and, kind of the arts community worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we talk about contemporary art, and if you want to run the clock all the way back, it was the early industrialists of Chicago that traveled to France and fell in love with the Impressionists, which was contemporary then, and definitely not not necessarily as collected. So, a good bulk of what you see at the Art Institute, which is an extraordinary collection of Impressionist work, happened because the early collectors in Chicago were adventurous. And I would venture to say, as it's been explained to me, that many of those Chicagoans then that traveled to New York fell in love with surrealism. And you have many of the leading collectors and pieces that have been donated to the institutions, not just at the Art Institute, but MoMA, that came from Chicago collectors that fell in love with the new contemporary work called surrealism. So, I think that is what has fueled Chicago's place, as you said, in that art fair cog world. And that is, we have extraordinary institutions, not just the Art Institute of Chicago, but the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, who Fair has a long relationship with, as well as I could list 20 more, along with the teaching institutions. And I think that's the other important piece in support of Expo Chicago is we have leading teaching institutions like the School of the Art Institute and the University of Illinois and Northwestern and the University of Chicago. All those schools generate a significant amount of artistic professionalism, not just artists, but also administrators. And that too factors in, I think, to the success of our fair.
I don't mean to, keep going back in time a little bit, but as you mentioned, before Expo Chicago, there was an art fair in Chicago called Art Chicago, roughly from 1980 up until the point that Expo Chicago took off in, I believe it was 2012. My question for you is, what challenges did you face, and what convinced you that there was an opportunity to create a new art fair in Chicago? And what challenges did you face in convincing the public that it wasn't just a rebranding of what was existing there before?
There's a lot of facets to that question. I happened to move to Chicago in the early 80s and worked for the first fair in Chicago, which was called the Chicago International Art Exposition. It changed its name and different ownership back in 1990. Well, 1993, there were 3 art fairs competing for what was going to be a place on the newly renovated Navy Pier, because the Chicago International Art Expositions took place in the old sheds, the pre-renovated Navy Pier. So Art Chicago flourished all the way from 1993 all the way through a period of time when it went through a challenge. It had moved off the pier. It was on to actually a tent in Grant Park. And in 2006, it needed to be transferred to the Merchandise Mart. It was then that I started working for the Merchandise Mart as the director of Art Chicago, beginning in 2007. I like to say that brought me back into the visual arts world. I had surely not worked for, but worked with in many roles the old fairs. I was close to the fairs. I know that there's a few of us in Chicago, but I have not missed an art fair in Chicago since 1983. So that's a pretty crazy run. But having worked for Art Chicago, I just saw that opportunity to not just rebrand, but reestablish the fair back at Navy Pier. Back then, I announced in June of 2011 that Expo Chicago was going to begin in September of 2012. And so there was a real calling, I think, to go back to the venue that was built for it, to establish an important list of dealers in the selection committee, to move to a different time slot. The art fair in Chicago was always in May and then April. And, I think that the September slot, goes back to 2012, was wide open and important opportunity. I was lucky enough to work with a noted architect named Jeannie Gang to redesign the first Expo Chicago. And you put all of those together. I also was able to galvanize the collectors and the institutions around that moment. I think that there's a lot of civic pride. No, I don't think. I know that there's a lot of civic pride about what this fair means to the city. And so, with a little tending of the garden and making sure that the stakeholders truly understood what my vision was for the fair, was the call. However, to answer another part of your question, there were serious doubts about the success or the opportunity to succeed with a new fair, because after all, Miami was going strong. The other art fairs in the world were obviously assertive, and there was a great deal of competition. But you take those chances and you hope to establish something that is meaningful to the art world. And we were lucky enough to have a great first year, and great years up until well, our last fair in September was in 2019, right before the pandemic. So I think that the full arc of the fair, especially those first years, were an important renewal and an important time for Chicago to reassert itself. And when I say Chicago, I mean the greater community.
Well, you mentioned COVID. Can you talk a little bit about COVID affected all the industries, but in particular, I think of art fairs as being someplace where, when your proposition is gathering hundreds of thousands of people together in enclosed space, obviously COVID was a bigger problem for an institution like yours than others. Can you talk a little bit about what triage you had to go through to try to pivot? And, are there long-lasting changes that have kind of been put in place? Has it made your organization stronger?
First of all, it was a profound impact for me just because of where we sat in the calendar. We had to go through 2 postponements. As an independent operator, we had to work with our original investors and bring on potentially new investors to carry us through that time. We obviously had to go through a staff reduction to actually make it through. We never expected, when we postponed in 2020, that we would have to be off the calendar for 2.5 years. We expected one, but I think that reemerging in April of 22 in the new time slot, which was the only way we could re-enter into the calendar, was a real coming out in every way. But you retool, you get stronger by virtue of you look at what programming you may have done that you don't need to do. You look at efficiencies. We rebuilt an incredible staff. I think that the Expo Chicago has always benefited from an incredible legacy of great team members, and I'm deeply proud of that. We reemerged with new team members that were energized to rebuild the fair. And then we had the April of 22 and April of 23, and now we move into an incredible time to be acquired by the preeminent art fair division, Frieze, and this great team that has been assembled is just an extraordinary opportunity, not only for the future of the fair, but the current iteration, which will be the first Expo Chicago under the leadership and ownership of Frieze. So we worked through the 2 years of the pandemic. We reemerged, we reestablished ourselves in a new date calendar, and now we look forward to the next few years of rethinking our place with great leadership and of working with the Frieze team.
Yeah. Have you found that there are operational efficiencies that come along with being part of the Frieze team, or are you still operating with a entire sense of autonomy?
The efficiencies that come with a company like Frieze is not lost on any of us. Their their effectiveness in the cities that they operate fairs is not lost on anyone. With a great list of participating exhibitors, extraordinary programming, obviously the link with the publishing, but most importantly, those efficiencies are now rolling into what will be incorporated for Expo Chicago. This is a little bit of a transition year. We don't expect all of the pieces to be in place for April of 24. But I can guarantee that, we are integrating efficiently, and, I look forward to the next few years with that machine completely in place. But, again, there's no question, as an independent operator, I think I'd like to say with a little bit of pride, we punched above our weight, but now being aware of, the extraordinary team members and the efficiencies that come with what is the Frieze operation is, impressive to say the least. And I can guarantee that, that they will be doing what everyone would want us to be doing in support of many, many years of an Expo Chicago.
With so many art fairs out there now, like we said, nearly 400, do you find yourself having to compete with other art fairs for exhibitors, for collectors, for sponsors? Because we can't expect all of those to make it to every fair. And how do you maintain those relationships? How do you identify who those constituents are? And how do you bring them into the fold and make sure they're coming back?
We've had a long history of strong recidivism, lots of galleries returning, but, there's a lot of challenges for galleries with the number of fairs that they may want to do. So, we have a good list of dealers that have returned. We work with dealers that want to explore this marketplace, to use that word. And more importantly, I think that we offer a unique opportunity. I think all the fairs have to, find their voice and their place of service to the art world. And I think that we look to provide, programming that supports that participation. We inaugurated what was called the Curatorial Forum back in 2014. That has grown into an important asset for the fair, where we convene national and international curators. We bring them into Chicago for not only participating in support of our exhibitors, but a part of participating in a conference. That is done in collaboration with Independent Curators International, ICI. We have a curatorial exchange working with many of the consulates and the countries in the world to also contribute curators to that wonderful experience. We inaugurated the Directors Summit to bring in museum directors for 2 public panels and keynote sessions to also just reinforce Expo Chicago's commitment to the arts professionals that are shaping our art world. So back to your original question, I think that, we want to make sure that we are providing an extraordinary experience, not just for our exhibitors, but our patrons. And, there are galleries that will put us into a rotation every couple of years, which is a lovely thing. Good for them, good for us. I think that we in working with the selection committee, want to make sure that the quality of participating galleries is always strong. We are clearly looking globally as well as regionally for participation. You'll see an extraordinary list of galleries participating in our exposure section. That's a section for exhibitors that are 10 years and younger. And it's always been incredibly international. So, I mean, I think that back to where we started a few minutes ago, art fairs provide that convening moment for curators, collectors, arts professionals to explore not just the city, but the participating galleries. And I think it's always healthy if there's a little bit of a little bit of a mix and a little bit of discovery as it relates to galleries participating.
It seems very strategic to have such a focus on the curators and the directors. Because, I mean, at one level, a fair could just try to peddle to collectors, but for the value of an artist's work to go up, for a gallery to benefit by the increasing value, a lot of times we're looking at who are the collectors that are going to wind up putting these works in the hands of the institutions. And so to have the institutions really brought in, as an active part of the dialogue, seems like a really strategic relationship to try to nurture.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a part of the value package that we hope to offer, the participating exhibitors. It's not lost on any of us. This is an expensive proposition. And obviously, we do our best in attracting collectors to ensure that commerce takes place. But that wonderful mix of commerce and curatorial exposure, I think, is a great value for our participating exhibitors. It's obviously a value for even the participating curators in our programming. They get a chance to explore the art world in one great location, but they do it with this incredible collegiality. And I always say, back to the curatorial forum, our legacy is convening over 300 curators over the course of programming. I guess I should do my count. It may be even more than that. And I know that in the course of those participating curators attending the fair, they have supported, they have found, they have created professional relationships, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to herald that legacy as well. But it all goes back to supporting the exhibiting and participating dealers. I think that it's not lost on us or any of now the being able to work with Frieze. It's not lost on any of us that that we're in service of the exhibitors, who ultimately are in service of the artists that they're showing.
Can you talk a little bit about how the programming is broken down on the exhibition floor? You have areas that are kind of set aside for gallery spaces, but then there are also, I feel like you have areas set aside for curatorial exhibition, maybe some commissioned work. Can you kind of describe how robust your programming is kind of broken down across the floor?
Yeah, in addition to the main gallery section, we have exposure, which is the galleries 10 years and younger. We have a section called Profile, which are galleries that have no age restriction, that are doing a solo artist presentation. We have an editions and books section, which has been incredibly well received, working with many dealers working with editions work. We also have a special exhibitions section, and that's typically working with nonprofits or museums. It has been a hallmark of Expo Chicago to be working with institutions, because it provides a different opportunity for a museum or the School of the Art Institute to showcase artwork that could both be sold in support of the museum or presented as it relates to, like, the School of the Art Institute or the University of Chicago, where they curate work from their student body. So in addition to that, we have what's called in situ, and in situ is a section of works that are curated from galleries participating in the fair. We also have a section. The exposure section is curated by a woman named Rosario Garaldes from the Walker Art Museum. And we also have a very rich program called Dialogues, which presents over 30 panels of arts professionals and artists that are open to the general public, as well as our Northern Trust Exchange stage up in our VIP area that also produces about 3 or 4 panels for more of the professional industry discussions. So, there's a wide array of offerings for arts patrons to experience.
My impression is that the fair in Chicago has become bigger than just Expo Chicago, that like Miami Beach, it's kind of become an art week in Chicago. Is that something that you have, helped kind of spearhead, or is that just something that is organically just a byproduct of having a rich art fair?
I wanted to thank you for asking that question, because there's a couple of more programs that I can speak to. And I was remiss, if I can go backwards a little bit. I did not mention that we are working with an incredible curator, Amara Antia, that is an independent curator now, based between Cincinnati and Washington, that is working with our artistic director, Kate Sears-Patowski, on the In Situ program on Inside. I hope that, I learned as a young man that collaboration is the most important aspect of anyone's success. And I think that from the beginning of Expo Chicago, we wanted to create a broad umbrella and reach our arms out to our institutions, our city, and create that week, Expo Art Week, to also encourage everyone that's in this culture or hospitality sector to engage with us and collaborate with us. So we inaugurated Expo Art Week back in 2012 to do just that. We also we work closely with the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events to present an incredible digital presentation called Override on the city's 36 billboards, electronic billboards on all of the highways. We curate 10 to 12 artists from galleries participating in the fair to be on that rotating exhibition. That's a perfect example of what we can do in Chicago as a part of Expo Art Week. We've always worked closely with the hospitality sector. We have a great relationship with the Peninsula Hotel, one of our host hotels, and we curate an exhibition with a noted artist or collector each year. Again, it's that full collaboration that takes place. You may know that the Merchandise Mart inaugurated what was called Art on the Mart.
Right.
We do a featured presentation, or they align a featured presentation of a new artist's work with us during the week of the fair. We're deeply proud of that alignment. And I'm just scratching the surface of the long list of collaborations that will take place that Chicago has to offer. And I think that's the back to what I had said earlier. That's the most important part. We want individuals that know Chicago or don't know Chicago, those from the U.S. or abroad, to come experience this rich cultural community, along with the offerings, the most important part, the centerpiece, and that's Expo Chicago. And so this is our time to play our civic role, and working with everyone to elevate this rich cultural community.
We at this point we are about 2 weeks out, or I'm sorry, we're about 2 months out from the event.
Thank you for giving me a couple of months.
Exactly. So being a couple of months out, it just hearing you talk about the size and scope and all the constituents, it just feels like there must be thousands of moving parts. What's giving you gas right now, and what are the things that have to come together here in the next 8 or 9 weeks? And one of the things I find so interesting about art fairs, from just a logistics standpoint, is that some of these venues are totally used for other things. I think of like the Dallas Art Fair. It empties out an entire building, of its tenants and reimagines it as an art fair, right?
Yeah.
What are the logistics and what are the things that are on your plate that are going to keep you up over the next couple of months?
Um, there are a lot of moving parts here. I mean, Navy Pier is 170,000 square feet. We use every bit of that and more, even in the ancillary areas. There will be, dozens of semi trucks of both material. We build a city at Navy Pier, in addition to the dozens of semi trucks worth of artwork that will need to be coordinated to be brought in. So, we're in that place right now where we're finalizing what we're going to be. 2 months out is a pretty critical time. We're finalizing the floor plan, and each of the dealers have gotten their locations, and they're looking to either customize and sending final plans in. All that starts to be compiled. So when we take possession of Navy Pier, end of March, we start to build to everyone's design. In addition to that, we are finalizing, our talks programming. We are finalizing our venues for many of the outside events. We're working with our sponsors on what they would like out of their participation and collaboration with us. We're working with our institutions to make sure that they are, we are coordinated to collaborate with opening up their doors and, to our patrons. And, that's in addition to that, then there's the focus on marketing and ticketing and all the machinery that goes with opening our doors to the public. So, this is that 2 months out moment is, I always like to say this is where we need to stop adding, but lock down what we're going to be and be totally prepared to do all of that right. Although every time I like to say, stop adding, I'm known to add one or two things just because something falls into place at the last minute that is glorious in support of the addition.
When you think about the future of Expo Chicago and envision how it might become bigger and better, what would be the constraining factors? I mean, is it square footage or is it just resources? I mean, what is the limiting factors for what the fair is and what it can become?
I don't think in this case the size of the venue is actually, I believe, a strong asset for the long-term future of Expo Chicago. We have what is called Festival Hall. I mentioned the size of that hall, but we have areas of Navy Pier that we could always grow into, but we haven't, but yet that capacity is there if we wanted to. I think the most important thing is for us to maintain our relevance in support of the participating exhibitors, for us to continue to provide the value that we want to provide them, and us making sure that we can attract the leading collectors and arts professionals to our city every year. There really isn't, that's the most important aspect here. Finding our place in the calendar. We reestablished our place in April. It's a wonderful time to be in Chicago. And so we just need to lean into the art fair calendar and provide an opportunity for our exhibitors to see the support from the greater Midwest collectors and institutions. I think that, as I said, that's an important aspect of where we want to continue to be. But this is a time for us to, especially under the new leadership of Frieze and their division, I think it's time for all of us to be reevaluating many aspects of what Expo Chicago was and can be. And I feel strongly that the future for the fair, given that it's in extraordinary hands with a team of individuals that are focused on maintaining its excellence, I think that we have a lot of opportunity ahead of us. And, I think we have an openness to revision, much of what we have done and reestablish, or I should say, establish some, new programming for the future.
We talk about Frieze and what they're able to offer. I guess one question I would have for you is, we talk about collegiality, there locally, but what is it like for you being the director of an art fair? What are the relationships like with the other directors of other art fairs? I mean, do you travel to other fairs? Do you have relationships with heads, or, are these competitors, or do you understand that you're all in the same boat?
Speaking for myself, I think I both maintained and still maintain relationships with most all the fair directors in the world. It's something that was important to me. I guess there's always some level of competition by virtue of the fact that, we're all looking to be, looking to build fairs in our respective cities. But, there's a collegiality that can come with that professional cohort. And, I'm grateful for, working with and in touch with probably 20 or so, maybe more museum directors around the world consistently. If I visit their fair, I'm one of the first to be able to either give them a pre-congratulations or congratulations at the fair. And it's been important to me to maintain those relationships. I hope that they feel the same about me. I was just in Mexico City, as I mentioned before our call, and the director and owner of the fair is a good friend. It was nice to both run into her, but also have her, pull me into a broader conversation to get collectors from Mexico City up to Chicago. And I think that kind of collegiality is important. Working with the Frieze team has been extraordinary, because I'm, deeply respectful for the leadership and the directors of the Frieze art fairs. I think we all can look to their excellence, and I surely can learn a great deal from their work. And I've always maintained a good relationship with their leadership and the other leading fairs in the world. So again, I think it's important. It's always been important to me, should I say.
Tony, I really appreciate you being willing to sit down and talk about the inner workings and the vision for Expo Chicago. I encourage folks to travel to the Third Coast this April. So April 11th to 14th at Expo Chicago. Tony, I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for bearing with me a bit, and for your time today and the opportunity to expound on everything Chicago, Expo Chicago, and everything that I hope that we offer your listeners this April and in the future. So I'll see you in Chicago in a couple of months.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.